Hi folks, welcome to the Elad pod. We are going to get started right after 1 o'clock. I'm going to come back and annoy you one more time. But for those of you who have not watched before and you're watching now on Facebook, Twitter, even YouTube, go ahead and share it. You can start a watch party on Facebook to bring more folks into this conversation. Today we are going to have Rich Finneran, who is running for Missouri Attorney General, on as a guest with us. Very excited. If you are on Facebook or YouTube or Twitter, your comments will come straight to us. So we'll be able to answer your questions live. Let us know where you're watching from. So go ahead, put that in the comment where you're viewing the show from today. And we'll be back with you in a bit. I'm going to come on right around 1 o'clock to remind you again to share it. But while you're waiting there, you got nothing else to do. Get something and bring it on over and share the thing too, so we can have more folks in on this conversation. And we'll see you in just a little bit. Welcome, everybody, to the Elad Pod. Thank you all for watching. If you're just tuning in right now and you haven't heard my speech yet, please go ahead and share wherever you're watching from. If you're watching on Facebook, you can start a watch party. If you're watching on YouTube, you can share that link with other folks. If you're on Twitter, go ahead and retweet it and let folks know that you're watching. We are able to see your comments and your questions, and we've already got a few that are coming in right now that we'll be able to answer live. The Elad Pod is a show that, goodness, we started right around the start of the coronavirus in order to keep folks connected to government, folks connected to the different policy issues that we're all dealing with. So these are totally uncensored, open town halls for anybody to participate in, and we have viewers from all over the world, as my emails have indicated so far, but mostly folks with ties to Missouri and interests in Missouri. So we're very excited to be here with you today. So while you're watching, make sure, remember to share. 2, if you'd like to comment below and let us know where you're watching from, that really helps us out too, because we're able to see all of that come in and really answer any questions that you all have as this goes along. Today, to open Season 2 of the Elad Pod, our first episode, we are going to have Rich Finneran. He is running for Missouri Attorney General. So he's shared that stuff on his platforms too. So if you're coming in from there, great. We're going to bring him on in just a second. Again, please go ahead and share so we can get more folks in this conversation. If you are watching on the website at eladgross.live, you are able to text in your questions as well. And heck, if you feel more comfortable doing that, I'm going to go ahead and put that number up here for you too. That is, as many of you know, this cell phone right here. So if you'd like to go ahead and text in your questions, I know some people prefer doing that already. Go ahead and do that anytime during the show. We'll try to get to as many of these as we possibly can. Thank you all for coming and being here. Very excited today for our show. So let me go ahead and bring in our guest. Make sure he's here. Rich, are you there?
I'm here, Elad.
We did it. Great. Wonderful. Well, welcome to the Elad Pod. This is your first time on.
It is my first time on. I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. No, thanks for coming. Very excited to have you. As some of you know, Rich and I were running for the same position, Missouri Attorney General. We were both very excited to be doing that, had our own ideas, our plans, the ways that we were running around the state and trying to get more folks involved. And we had a primary that did happen, and Rich came out on top at the end of the primary. So a lot of folks are like, well, okay, there goes the Elad Pod, and there goes that campaign and everything else. But, we had a lot of requests for folks to keep the show going and a lot of interest in doing that. And Rich, I think both of us, we really spoke to this over the campaign for folks who watched. They really noted how clean of a campaign it was, how much we really agreed on so many different things. And I think really the number one thing that we do agree with is that Missouri needs a new attorney general very, very badly. And so I'm really excited to have you on and be able to introduce you to a bunch of folks on my side who might not have been able to hear from you before. So thanks for coming. You've done a whole lot. I'd like, if you could you introduce yourself to everybody here, the work that you've done and why you're running for Attorney General?
Okay, well, I'll do that in a segment. First, Elad, I have to thank you so much for having me. And I know that there was some even conversation on Twitter when you announced we were doing this. I think some people might have been surprised at first that you would be so readily willing to invite your former rival in the primary onto your show to help us spread the word about our campaign. But I think that really is a testament to your character and to you as a person. As I said in a message that I know you sent to your supporters recently, you and I have known each other for a long time. I've always had a huge amount of respect for you, and I have a huge amount of respect for what you did in this campaign. But as I also said, we talked before I even got in the race, and we agreed that this wasn't really about you or about me. This is about the people who are watching us today, the people in Missouri who have so many problems that we, from our positions, hopefully in government, will be able to tackle. And I'm so grateful that you've decided to continue to be a part of that process. And I hope that we will see a lot more from you both these next 3 months and many years thereafter. Because I, as you know, have a huge amount of admiration for you and what you did in your campaign. So
appreciate it.
I just want to begin by saying that. But I know there are a lot of you who probably have not heard from me directly before, you probably knew that I was running. But I'm very happy, as Elad said, to introduce myself to you. My name is Rich Finneran. I'm a former federal prosecutor, just like Elad from St. Louis. And I spent 7 years at the U.S. Attorney's Office in St. Louis, where I prosecuted mostly large-scale white-collar and corporate fraud cases, including the two largest criminal fraud cases in the history of our state. In those cases and the many others that I handled during my time as a federal prosecutor, I recovered millions of dollars for the people of our state and fought for the victimized and marginalized throughout our state. After doing that for 7 years, I decided that I would take what I learned in that position and I would try to bring it into a broader context. And so I worked very closely on a campaign that my friend Court Van Ostrand ran in 2016, and that inspired me to think about getting involved in this race myself. And so people asked me, Elad had already been in the race for some time by the time I got in. Why would you run against Elad, your friend? And I always tell people, well, I never felt I was running against Elad. I was running alongside him. We do share so many of the same values. And what I think is most important is that we get Eric Schmidt, our current Attorney General, out of office. Because really, no matter what issues are important to you in this state, it's pretty much definite that Eric Schmidt is not working to further your interests and support you and your family. Instead, he's working to try to further his own political ambition and the politics of the Republican Party in our state. And the clearest example of that, which we've been talking about since we started our campaign, is his crusade against the Affordable Care Act. He's been waging this battle now for years, taking it now all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, where if he prevails, people in Missouri and across the country would lose guaranteed coverage for pre-existing conditions. And as Elad and I talked about last week, we all voted to expand Medicaid by a significant margin. That would also fall if Eric Schmidt prevails in this lawsuit. And so it's really, really important that we fight back against him. We have to be united to do it. Elad and I always viewed our role in this campaign. We would each go and try to energize as many voters as we could, build our names and our messages as strong as we could. And now I'm just excited to bring our respective bases of support together. I think we're definitely stronger together than we would have been individually. And if Elad had prevailed in the primary, I'd be doing the exact same thing here, trying to help him build the support that he would need. And I'm really gratified that we're able to talk today and work on unifying our party to go and try and retake the Attorney General's office in November.
Yeah, it's an extremely important office, and for those of you who've watched before, we talk a lot about the details, and folks are very interested in the policy behind everything. It's the office has so much involvement in so many areas, and you just talking about healthcare quite a bit, and we just expanded Medicaid in the state of Missouri, which was a very big policy issue. Unfortunately, our legislature wouldn't do it, but we did it. We, the people, did instead. There are some issues there that I do want to address because this has come up with folks now, especially since we've had some state senators indicate that they're still appropriating funds and they can decide whether Medicaid really does get implemented in Missouri or not. Right. One of the things that we see some states do, because in our constitutional amendment that we passed to expand Medicaid, it requires that health care be expanded so that folks who are usually in a more vulnerable financial area, and that's a ton of people, especially in rural Missouri, really are going to be able to access affordable care now for the first time in a very long time, but the first time, right, under Medicaid for sure in Missouri. But in some states we see work requirements that folks try to put in, certain testing or screening or anything else there. And the Attorney General can play a very important role in those kinds of issues on the civil rights side. Is that something that you would be interested in doing as Attorney General? Is that a position that you would take?
Just make sure you're clear. Yeah, the thing that I would do is make sure that the will of the voters is enforced. In other words, that we are enforcing the Medicaid expansion that we all voted for. If our legislature tries to put obstacles in the way of people getting the health care that we all voted for, then I think that I, as Attorney General, would have to take a hard look at whether that was consistent with federal law, consistent with what is an amendment now to Missouri's Constitution. So this is not something the legislature can simply override through its own bill. We have to make sure the voters' will is enforced and that the law is enforced, and that means protecting access to Medicaid for everybody who's entitled to it, not just people who, might have recently lost work or anything along those lines. That's not what the program is for. The program is there to help people who are in that gap between the previous expansion of Medicaid and the ability to get private insurance, to make sure that they are able to get the health care that they and their families need. Yeah. So I'm fully supportive of what the voters voted for on Tuesday, and I fully intend to use the power of the Attorney General's office to enforce their will, no matter what our legislature may try to do to undermine it.
Yeah. That's important, and I mean, obviously, I agree with that position in a lot of different ways. We did have a question that came on, and hold that, but I can get it up on the screen too, because I know this came in earlier, and she couldn't be here the whole time. But Sydney Mayfield wants to know your thoughts on a civil rights division at the Attorney General's office. I know that's something that Sydney's been very passionate about, saying that we actually talked about while I was running, and something that I talked about a significant amount too. What is your vision for civil rights enforcement at the Attorney General's office under your leadership?
Well, first of all, you're right, Elad. That was your idea, something that you pushed forward very aggressively in your campaign, and I think it's a good idea. And I'm not against stealing ideas from people who have great ones. And you
take them, man. That's good. Take them, please, goodness, as many as you want.
So this, right. So it's not just in the terms of civil rights division. I know that you propose an incredibly detailed set of plans for your vision for the Attorney General's office. My team is working through all those plans right now to try to figure out what can we do along the same lines that you suggested to try to implement some of your great ideas. And again, I have no pride in authorship or ego in this. If there's a good idea that you or any of the people watching today have, I want to hear it. I want to bring it into our conversation, because I think the more voices we have in the process, the better we can be. So I definitely have always agreed with you. I didn't want to, just take the exact same proposal you had made, but always agreed with you that we have to increase civil rights enforcement in our Attorney General's office. One of the things that people don't appreciate about the importance of that office is that since the Attorney General gets to make staffing decisions about whether something is going to get resources or not, different Attorney Generals can vastly affect the way that laws are enforced in this state. And civil rights is an area where, you're right, there's never been a dedicated division in the office, but the lawyers who used to work on those matters have had their time and energy rededicated to some of these political causes and other misuses of the AG's office. So whether it's the form of a new division or just reallocation of resources, I'm committed to making sure the Attorney General's office is enforcing our civil rights laws, and that includes laws that protect workers. It includes laws that protect rights to privacy. All of these laws are so critically important, but our Attorney General right now is more interested in running to the Supreme Court to try to take our rights away than trying to protect them. So that's one of your many great ideas. I will not claim credit for it, but I hope you won't be mad if I ultimately steal it once we get into the office and see if there's an opportunity to make that a central part of our agenda.
Okay, I'm gonna say this is my official statement on the matter. Take them all. Take all the plans. We spent a lot of time on them, so no, please. I mean, goodness. No, that's the idea, and I think I've talked about this a whole lot, and we've reiterated it a few times already, but this really can't be about a person getting elected to office, right? It has to be about an idea, this whole idea of us being involved in our government being responsive to us and serving us. And the problem that we're having right now is that there are a lot of folks who have used this office in particular to really jump to something else, to move to something else, to take advantage of that situation, make it very political. And it's really sad, because this is such an important office that a lot of folks don't know as much about. And, it's really a job that we both undertaken to make sure that folks understand the importance of an attorney general. That's why we do these things today. So it's a great opportunity. That's a great question. Yeah. So thank you, Sydney. All right, we've got a question from Laura. I'll put this on the screen too. Oh, it's working on the screen today. Laura says, as Moms Demand Action volunteer involved in elections and legislation, I'd love to hear Rich's plans for fighting the gun violence epidemic in Missouri. Thank you. So thoughts about that?
Well, again, an issue that you and I know. I know we've done a lot of these things with Democratic clubs, and we often have the same message on a lot of these things. But this is something you and I have talked about before with voters. it's very important that we focus on gun violence not as just a problem of criminal enforcement, but as a problem of public health, and that we think about how we are going to approach that issue in a thoughtful kind of way. And, I believe in the Second Amendment. I teach constitutional law. It is part of our Constitution that people have a right to own a firearm for self-protection, for hunting, and I'm not looking to try to take away those rights. But I don't think that means that we have to have guns in places that guns don't belong. We don't need to have guns in churches and parks and on our streets, places where they will cause a risk of harm to people when it's not related to those Second Amendment rights of self-protection or hunting. And so the questioner said that she's with Moms Demand Action. I basically agree with almost all the positions that Moms Demand has taken. They are a really leading force on this issue. And, I support the things that not just Moms Demand, but a majority of gun owners support. Things like closing gun show loopholes, universal background checks, the sort of things that have been shown to actually reduce gun violence and the risk that guns can pose to people while still respecting the rights that we all have as Americans to own and possess firearms legally. And so we have to be able to have both those things at the same time. We can't view it as a problem of, well, if we eliminate the guns, we'll eliminate violence, or if we have all the guns, then, that will solve our problems. We have to be thoughtful and intelligent about this. So as the Attorney General, my job will be to enforce the laws that we have on the books, but make sure that we do have the resources dedicated to preventing gun violence in our cities and in our towns. And I'm very committed to allocating the resources of the offices appropriately to do that.
Yeah. I mean, it's all over. I actually, for those of you who are in the Twitterverse, there was a little bit of an argument today between me and the head of the executive director of the Missouri Republican Party, because this isn't just an issue that's happening in urban Missouri. I mean, that's obviously there's a concentration there because there's a lot of people there, but we have seen violence rising all throughout rural Missouri too, and this has been happening under current statewide leadership. It's why I've been, a very big advocate for, and Nicole Galloway has spoken about this too, but these different intervention programs that have really been proven in different states to work. And for those of you who have been watching before, we brought on some guests from across the country to really talk about this issue in Missouri. But yeah, we're in a pretty bad situation right now in our state, and it would be very nice to have leadership in our state government that understands that, isn't just trying to keep us divided by blaming this on the cities and saying, oh, everybody else is fine, but actually appreciates those problems that are happening all across the state right now.
Well, and the other thing to say there is that, I think that what our current leadership has done has demonstrated that they have taken a failed strategy to these kinds of issues. The basic, you see the crime bill that's being debated last week and this next week in the legislature, and they seem to think that just throwing more juveniles into adult prisons is somehow going to solve the problem of gun violence in our cities. And, I know from my career as a federal prosecutor, from all the work that you've done as both an assistant attorney general and as a public defender, a special public defender, that those answers are not a complete answer to the problem. We have to be thinking about these issues holistically if we're going to ever find solutions. So, again, another issue where I know you and I have see eye to eye on quite a bit. But it's definitely something we need to have new leadership and new ideas around.
Yeah. And I mean, especially with the issue with minors, and there's been some discussion. I mean, we saw it with the Senate vote and everything else. There's right now in Missouri, you are able to certify certain minors as adults for prosecution in the most egregious crimes like murder, all these other situations. Missouri used to have an extremely strong, believe it or not, juvenile justice system that actually did a lot of work rehabilitating folks, and folks were using the Missouri model in different places. That used to be a thing. Like, people used to come here and say, oh, Missouri, you're doing a great job at this. That, unfortunately, is a long time behind us now, and we've really stopped investing in so many of our public institutions, and, we get to the position we are right now today. But yeah, unfortunately, some of these things are actually just modifications on crimes that they're trying to certify kids for now. So, I mean, you might not even be doing a very serious crime, relative to what's going on there, but and still get certified under some of these requests that the governor has. And it just wild. Like, how in the world are we finding all of this money for prisons? We don't have money for education. We don't have money for healthcare, all of these other things. But yeah, to build prisons, we'll find $500 million for that real quick. Yeah.
Well, and I know we've got many other questions, so I don't want to steal much more time. But this is a real. It's to me, the juvenile bill sort of illustrates the wrongness of this thinking, because when people are juveniles, when they have their first interaction with the criminal justice system, that's the opportunity that we have to try to turn their path around and get them into a situation where, instead of sending them to prison, which often leads to recidivism and repeat crimes, and thus makes us less safe, we can try those early interventions that have been shown through diversion and other kinds of programs to reduce the likelihood that person reoffends, which again isn't just to benefit that person, it's to benefit our broader communities. That's what will make us more safe, not just throwing more and more people in jail as though that's going to solve the problem. So I know we see eye to eye on so many of these issues, and I know many other people have asked questions, but this is one that I'm definitely very passionate about.
Yeah, it's okay. And we can go into depth on some of these. And what's nice is, if you are sending questions, like, what's nice is we can both go back and respond to those later on too. So keep throwing them in. There's a lot in here. This is probably the most that we've gotten at this early of a stage of the podcast so far. So go ahead, keep throwing them in there, and we'll respond to them too. So we'll get back to you if we can't get them on the show. But this is a very important issue. I worked a lot on it's now called the Keep Kids in Class Task Force, I think. I'm sorry, guys, if I'm getting that wrong. But it used to be the School to Prison Pipeline Task Force, and it was with a bunch of different groups, the ACLU, Legal Services, and Sarah Unsicker, who's a state representative, was instrumental in a lot of the fight around here. She was a member of it too. But to actually raise the age of juvenile jurisdictions so that we were including more teenagers in the juvenile system instead of less. And that was the movement we were going towards until, this election year thing hit, and some people wanted to get some sound bites real quick on cable TV. And it's sad to see that, that kind of progress reversed instead of seeing actual leadership on these issues. And, I certainly feel a way about that. So, all right, we got a longer question. Audrey, I wish I could put you're going to take over the entire page if I put this on there, but she's got some important questions here. And so she's in Washington, Missouri. Issues that she's been seeing specifically are sex trafficking, opioid addiction, and puppy mills. She's confident on you on puppy mills. She's heard you talk about it a bit. And I guess, for everybody else out here, that's an opportunity too. But she'd like to know your plans on all three of those things. So sex trafficking, opioid addiction, and puppy mills from the Attorney General's office.
Well, these are just, I think, three great examples of things that are traditional core areas of enforcement for our state's chief law enforcement officer that have largely been neglected by the current administration. And it's what I said before. It's because he's more interested in running off and pursuing these political causes of his in the courts. The Republicans usually affect policy changes, but that's exactly what the Republicans are doing now, and it's distracting them from some of these important issues. I mean, puppy mills is just one of those. This is an area where there is direct statutes on point that we passed democratically years ago to enforce restrictions on the use of puppy mills, and yet we still see a continual failure of enforcement on the part of our Attorney General. Same thing when it comes to sex trafficking. That was a core area where my old office, the U.S. Attorney's Office, was focused on collaborating with the Attorney General's office and local law enforcement to try to snuff out sex trafficking in our state, something which I will commit to do and continue to do as Attorney General. And the opioid epidemic is something where there is a real crisis that is still going on. I think sometimes people forget, because it's not cropping up in the headlines as much, this is still a major problem in our state. Mm-hmm. And one thing that Eric Schmidt deserves a little bit of credit for is he has joined 48 other attorney generals, so not exactly a controversial move on his part, but to try to hold the pharmaceutical companies accountable for their role in promoting that epidemic. That's definitely something that I will continue to do and pursue aggressively as Attorney General. But we need to have more focus on these kinds of areas, these core law enforcement responsibilities, and less focus on political battles over health care or suing China or any of these other causes that he's he's sort of adopted over the course of his time as Attorney General. So these are all areas where we have laws on the books, and it's a matter of having an Attorney General who has the will to enforce them,
right,
and who's not going to be distracted by political opportunism.
Right. And what is nice, there's a couple of developments. So with Medicaid expansion, that is going to expand opportunities for substance abuse treatment. If you look
Absolutely.
in our prison system, I just got a text, a question about the prison system, so it might be a good segue. We'll see how I end up talking, because you all know I could talk for a little bit. But in our prison system, 90+% of people who are there report an issue with substance abuse. I mean, just dealing with that issue in itself, I mean, having spoken to a lot of law enforcement officers in Jefferson County and some other rural areas of the state, one of the biggest volume of calls oftentimes is coming from substance abuse issues. And they aren't equipped to deal with it, because we don't treat it as a public health issue. We're treating it as a justice issue, and that's really causing a whole lot of these problems.
Well, and that I don't want to interrupt, but that theme is a theme that I think one thing I want to make sure we're doing this campaign is I think I can use my background as a prosecutor to talk effectively of the state, including who, maybe make sure they understand the importance of what you just said, Elad, because too often we sort of assume that if something is a crime, that the only answers to that problem can be inside the justice system. But I will tell you from my career as a prosecutor that you can charge as many people as you want and put as many people in jail at the end of the day as you want, but every criminal case is a tragedy. It's a tragedy for the victims. It's a tragedy for the defendant, the defendant's family. And we should start thinking more holistically, not just inside the justice system, but the justice system is a part of our overall system, and start asking the question, not how do we punish crime, but how do we prevent crime? And once we start asking that question and taking that broader lens, we come up with different solutions, broader solutions, and ones that have been shown to be more effective solutions in states that are ahead of Missouri on these issues. So I know we just talked about it in this one narrow context, but this is a broad theme that I intend to make a very strong part of our general election campaign.
Yeah, totally agree. And on the opioid issue, too, you're exactly right, because our current attorney general is involved in that lawsuit. But that means that, upon winning, you will be, too. And so you're going to have a lot of control over, the settlement terms and all that other stuff. And so that's very important to have somebody in there who understands these issues and has a perspective that you as a voter agree with. So hopefully you're agreeing and you're voting. So that's the idea. But we did. So I will go to the question here, because it's one that comes up a lot, but I got it through text, so I want to make sure I get it out there right. Position on private for-profit prisons. So in Missouri, we don't have for-profit prisons. Yet, they're not private. They're all publicly owned. There are services that are provided in there. There are for-profit. So phone calls, now emails you're charged for, canteen services, those kinds of things. But I guess in general, in case this does come up, because I guess at some point in states, when they were public and then moved to private, there was a movement to do that. Do you have a position on private prisons?
I don't see any need for us to explore private prisons in Missouri. Yeah, I think the experience of other states has shown that you wind up not with having better run, more efficiently run prisons, but prisons that produce more prison litigation, because the prisons are not being run correctly. And that's also a perhaps lesser known but important role of the Attorney General, is that you handle prison litigation. And as a result of that, you do have some authority and power over ensuring that the prisons are being run properly and that prisoners' civil rights are being protected. Just because somebody has been convicted of a crime, that doesn't mean they can be mistreated or abused while they're in prison. When I was in private practice at the beginning of my career, I handled a case where we were able to obtain a judgment against 2 prison guards who had improperly treated a prisoner. And it's important to have an attorney general who's not just going to reflexively defend every single action that a prison guard ever takes, but instead is going to look at those cases on a case-by-case basis. And when you identify a problem in a case that you have handled as the attorney general representing the state, then you should be working with the prisons to try to improve their practices to avoid these kinds of constitutional violations in the future, which, yes, saves taxpayer dollars because it's fewer dollars the state has to pay out in settlements and judgments when prison officials act inappropriately, but it's also just part of having a constitutional system of criminal law enforcement. And so that's the kind of mentality we need from our chief law enforcement officer. I fear that if we do enact private prisons in Missouri, then I'm going to have more of those cases on my hands to handle, not fewer. And therefore, I don't see the evidence to support the idea that we either save money at the end of the day by doing that or have a better prison system. So I'm not a supporter of private prisons, and I would need to see some pretty compelling evidence before my position on that would be changed.
Yeah. Yes, and there's so having worked at the Attorney General's office, there's a lot of involvement there, and would be very nice for all of us watching who pay taxes in Missouri. It'd be really great to have an Attorney General who is a bit proactive on those issues with the Department of Corrections. And I'm going to tell you what, the folks who work at the Department of Corrections, I know some of you are watching right now, you know that too. And there's a significant need for reform in that system. And the Attorney General has a very special perspective in that, especially when it comes to legal liability, which ends up coming out of our pockets. So, yeah, you're totally right. I agree. Policy and position on reproductive rights and abortion. So how do you see the Attorney General being involved in those issues in Missouri?
Well, first of all, let me say I'm unabashedly a pro-choice candidate. I support women's rights to make their own healthcare decisions, their own decision of whether to continue or terminate a pregnancy. I received, as Elad did, the endorsement of Planned Parenthood and the reproductive freedom Friend of Reproductive Freedom distinction from NARAL. So I'm in line with most of the positions you'd expect. But again, I think that from my perspective as a former federal prosecutor, I can talk about this issue in a way that even pro-life voters can understand and appreciate, which is that at the end of the day, what we're really asking when we're talking about abortion rights in the United States is who should make that decision. Should it be a decision for a woman and her doctor, or should be a decision for a state prosecutor to make? Because that's what it would mean if this draconian 8-week abortion bill that the Republicans have passed that makes no exception for rape and no exception for incest were enforced. It would mean that state prosecutors would be left with the decision whether or not to interfere in a woman's own healthcare decisions and potentially prosecute a doctor who was involved in those decisions. Now, no matter what you think, ultimately, in terms of your religious faith or other beliefs in terms of the sanctity of human life, I don't think we need to even argue about those issues. The question we're trying to answer in all these cases is who should decide that question. And I personally believe that I should trust a woman and her doctor to make responsible medical decisions for themselves and not put that decision in the hands of a state prosecutor and let him be the one exercising the discretion over those questions. Mm-hmm. So that's how I approach the issue. That's how I talk about the issue. And I think that's a perspective that I hope will translate across the political spectrum as we move towards November. One thing to remember is that this is a state where there is a great diversity of opinion on this issue. If you poll it, sometimes you'll have a 50% pro-life, 50% pro-choice, and it will sort of flip between the two. But when you get to the sort of bill that is currently being defended by our Attorney General, an abortion bill that makes it a crime to terminate a pregnancy only 8 weeks into a pregnancy before many women even know that they are pregnant, and that makes no exception for rape and no exception for incest, that is actually a very unpopular law in the state of Missouri. And I'm not sure that everybody in our state fully appreciates how extreme the law is that our Attorney General is defending. And I want to make sure that that's a message we deliver during this campaign so that people know that they have a choice of someone in the Attorney General's office who's going to stand with women and not try to have state prosecutors overriding their judgments about their own medical decisions.
Yeah. I mean, this was so extreme that a Republican representative in the state house, knowing that there was going to be retaliation against him for saying this, right, voted against it. And that same evening, Donald Trump, the president of the United States of America, said that it was a bad law. That's where we are in Missouri right now. And, thankfully it's not in effect right now, but it is in the court system. But yeah, it's a serious problem. And it gets to the point where we're really talking about how big should government be in those decisions? And should government be intervening in our own private decisions? And when you start to reduce, any of these kinds of privacy rights that we have under the Constitution, that means that all these other ones that we appreciate, that whether you support this issue or not, we're eroding all of those at the same time. And, I'm a very big believer in the right to privacy and the right to tell the government to go to hell in these kinds of situations. So my view, this is an interesting question. I don't know if I've ever gotten this one. So let's try it out. All right. So this one says, yeah, this is from Everett. How should the Attorney General deal with the dams on the Missouri River? The Army Corps of Engineers has not adequately addressed the ongoing issues at Fort Peck Dam, Montana, which, if not fixed, could endanger the entire Missouri River Valley and anything downstream of St. Louis on the Mississippi. It's a great question. It comes up quite a bit with, the different dams and the levees, and, when we start building them, instead of thinking about the long-term effects of where we're putting them, we kind of look at it as like our own community and what's going to happen to us if we don't put that thing up. So we do it, and then downstream it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Obviously, that's an issue there too, and it's one, the Attorney General used to have a division that dealt with conservation issues, and we had an Attorney General named Josh Hawley who got rid of that one, and it has not been brought back under the current Attorney General. So I guess, do you have any thoughts about the Army Corps of Engineers and river levees and dam placements?
Oh yeah, I'll agree with you a lot. This is not a question that I've gotten so far, so I'm going to make sure. You said it was Everett who asked it. I'm going to make sure that I get his information and try and get some more information about this. But yeah, I mean, this is an area, as you said, where our damage or preserve the wonderful bounty of natural resources that we have in the state of Missouri. It's something that our current Attorney General really has completely abdicated responsibility over. Josh Hawley started it, but he has very much carried on in his footsteps. And so this will be one of the many issues, I'm sure, that we will find has been left unaddressed by our current Attorney General and will have to focus on. When you're talking with things happening in other states that affect us downstream, that is exactly the kind of role the Attorney General has to have. If you don't have an Attorney General who's willing to stand up for the rights of the people of Missouri in those kinds of situations, then we're going to literally face the consequences when they come downstream to us. So I will look up Everett's question when we're done and learn more about this topic, because I'm sure it'll be one of the many areas we will find was neglected by our current Attorney General once we're in office in January.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a candidate who's running for Attorney General right now, Mr. Graybill, and I don't want to mispronounce his first name, having one that's interesting myself, but it's I think it's Rafe, maybe it's Raf. I don't want to say it wrong, but he's been very active in the environmental space because Montana is a gorgeous state. I love Missouri. Missouri is beautiful too. But, some of these pictures from Montana are absolutely crazy. But, that's a very big issue. And they have dealt with environmental issues for a long time. And, I think he is certainly on the right side of that. That's actually how he kind of came to fame and running, and what he's doing right now in terms of protecting public lands from destruction and all these other things. So, hopefully we get both of you in, and then, both of you can work on those issues together. Maybe we'll take care of Montana that way. But it's an important issue. The Attorney General does have, you're our lawyer. And so, you represent the state in those kinds of issues. And this is exactly right, Everett. This is right in that wheelhouse. And those issues are very particular depending on where they're coming from. But the Missouri River is one that's certainly been a big issue for a long time in our history. So it does, that actually, it's interesting. That's because we've had a lot of questions on this topic too. But in Montana, and if you haven't seen the film yet, it's called Dark Money. But it's very worthwhile watching, and they actually focus on one of these big environmental disasters that led to, because there was so much money coming into government, folks were being bought for corporate interests. Montana has been on the cutting edge since the early 20th century in terms of trying to get rid of big corporate influence in politics, making sure that the political system is more responsive, all these ethics reforms. And Montana fought very hard to ban dark money, which consists of these anonymous campaign contributions that come into our elections that are designed, we don't even know where they're coming from, but they're designed to sell our states to the highest bidder. Missouri has had a very big issue with that. I've talked a lot about that and can talk forever about that. We don't have forever right now. But I know in Montana they have passed an End Dark Money Act on their own. I proposed one here in Missouri that unfortunately does not have bipartisan support like it does over there. We've got a lot of questions about this. What is your view on dark money and ethics reform coming from the Attorney General's office?
Well, first of all, Elad, I want to applaud you because you really have been the leading voice in our state on this issue. And, everybody who's watching this, I know, knows that already. But you are shining a light on a really, really substantial problem that I think, when you started your campaign 2 years ago, I'm not sure most people knew what dark money meant. Yeah. Now I think it's something that's in the public consciousness, and you deserve a great deal of credit for that. But, we talked about this before, well, as you know, but our viewers don't, you came over 2 days after the election and we sat down and hung out for 3 hours and caught up since we hadn't really gotten to talk for the preceding 9 months. And we spent some time talking about this very issue because it's one that I'm very concerned about as well. I know you're very thoughtful about it. I know we shared some ideas and different thoughts about how to attack it. Mm-hmm. But I think you have to start with a commitment like I have made, and I know you made during your campaign, that you're not going to, as I am not going to, take any dark money. We haven't taken any corporate PAC money for our campaign. We are running this race in a transparent way where voters of the state of Missouri know where the money funding our campaign is coming from. And it's mostly coming from small individual donors like the people who are watching us today. But that said, that's only one piece of the puzzle, right? The reason dark money is bad is, yes, there's corporate influence. But the second thing is that means that the people who get elected do something because of who donate. That actually his predecessor, Josh Hawley, put into place to make sure that he would not be personally making the call on settlements or judgments or decisions relating to major campaign donors. Mm-hmm. And yet, that's exactly what we're seeing from our current Attorney General. So I have pledged not just to enforce that policy, but to expand that policy so that, I hate to break it to you, but if you're somebody on this video today who has made a donation to my campaign, I won't be the one making a decision if your case comes before the Attorney General's office, because I think that's the kind of corruption that we have to get out of all levels of our government if we want to be successful. So we have to make sure it starts at home with the Attorney General enforcing his own conflicts of interest policies. And then we also have to make sure that we're enforcing those laws across our political spectrum. When we see that kind of corruption and that kind of influence of dark money, we have to call it out and we have to attack it. And so I'm committed to doing that, Elad, just as you were. I know that it's a major issue that you have brought to the forefront, but I am excited to carry forward your efforts in that area and work together with you once I'm elected to help to ferret out some of the corruption in our government and get back to having a government that's going to put people ahead of politics and people ahead of the money.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and for those of you who have been following along, I do still have a case that's pending right now where I beat our current Attorney General in court who was representing our governor trying to hide public records. And those were involved in the dark money investigation. The Sunshine Law is one that also has been a question here too, but it's one that it's our public records law in Missouri that allows the public to access public records. That's the way it's supposed to work ever since President Richard Nixon. You might have heard of him. But since then, a lot of states started passing laws. In Missouri, ours was the Sunshine Law, in order to prevent something like that from happening again, where the public couldn't access these records. Currently, our Attorney General's perspective and his view, and it's in court, so you can see it if you want to. You don't have to believe me. But his view is that the public should be forced to pay money to attorneys that we're already paying for in order to access our own records. I wonder, maybe from a selfish perspective as well, what is your view on that and on Sunshine Law enforcement?
Well, okay, well, I don't want to promise you anything, Elad, I know, but let me say this. So first of all, enforcing the Sunshine Law is the Attorney General's job, not defending departments who are attempting to not enforce the Sunshine Law. So when there are requests made for public records, it's written out in this statute as a general rule, the public has a right to access those records. And so when those issues come before my office, we're going to enforce the law, not just reflexively defend the decision that a department made to try to withhold records from the public. The other thing that I've committed to doing is making sure that we are going to have transparency in the Attorney General's office on public records requests. So just as Nicole Galloway has done, if our office responds to a public records request that Elad or somebody else makes, where we either provide records or we say we can't provide records. For example, if there's a covert investigation going on and we can't